Welcome to Empowering Plans, a show dedicated to identifying waste and undue expense in the health benefits industry, discovering ways to maximize benefits while minimizing costs, and empowering employers, administrators, and consultants to emphasize once again the benefit and benefit plan. Today's episode is brought to you by RX Results, a pharmacy risk manager that serves as a clinical advocate for plan sponsors and plan participants. Now here are your hosts, the FIA Group's Senior Vice President and General Counsel, Ron Peck, and attorney, Brady Bizzarro.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, more like than not, good night. I know people like to listen to us to help them get to sleep. You are listening to another episode of the FIA Group's Empowering Plans podcast, or as I like to call it, the Ron Peck Power Hour, with your host, got the most, the Ron E. Peck, Esquire, Senior VP and General Counsel of the FIA Group. But all joking aside, with me is the brains behind the operation. People like to say, you know, there's the brain and the brawn. Well, this guy's got it both going on. Brady Bizzarro. How you doing, Brady?
I'm doing well.
Great. And also the unsung hero of these episodes. Usually we reference him at the end of the podcast, but by then you've probably stopped listening and turned it off, so you don't even know this guy exists. So I'm actually going to give him a shout out at the very start of the presentation. The one, the only Pat Santos, our producer. Literally, I think his parents called him Pat, gave him the name Pat, just so that we could have producer Pat alliteration, because they knew someday he'd be sitting there wearing those headphones. And it's actually funny, folks, today we actually have an outsider dialing in, a good friend and ally of the FIA Group and our clients, a partner of ours, someone who offers incredible cost containment services. Before I introduce the man of the hour, our guest, he's not in studio, he's dialing in, so he can't see what I'm about to describe, but as I explain this to you, he's hearing it for the first time as well. I look around the room, and I actually have a headset on now. I've got these earphones on, and Brady, he's across from me, and he's got the same thing so that we can hear the interviewee dialing in. And I look at it, and I'm not going to reference the brand because I'm not someone who likes to detract from anybody's brand, but I will say that Pat, the producer, is wearing some fine wireless, the noise cancellation Bose QC, what are those, 35s over there? And I'm realizing this guy over here, he's wearing the Bose equipment, and here we are like suckers wearing something less than. So LG, Hanzel on the phone with RX Results. I don't know what kind of headset you're wearing, my friend, but whatever it is, we're all ears. Why don't you go ahead and maybe introduce yourself to the audience, let them know who you are and who you're dialing on behalf of, and then we can go ahead and get started with the program.
Hey, Ron, how are you? I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I think it's appropriate that we're having this conversation right at the beginning of March Madness. Isn't that crazy?
Something is crazy right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to get started, again, my name is LG Hanzel, and I am a principal, and I'm Vice President in Business Development with a company called RX Results, and we'll talk a little bit about RX Results. We'll also talk a little bit about the madness that's going on in the pharmacy industry in general, and specifically deal with the topic of specialty drugs, which is just a huge issue for plan sponsors, for stop-loss carriers, for CFOs across the country as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys.
Well, thank you for being here, LG. You know, speaking of March Madness, I was actually thinking, and you know, this is the time of year when everybody puts different types of brackets together, and I was actually thinking about putting together a bracket, the biggest threats to the health benefits industry and self-funding in particular. And you might be happy to hear that specialty drugs and RX in general, I was thinking that there may be a number one seed. So I definitely, we're going to aim high today. They're everybody's favorite. I mean, you never know, right? I'm thinking, you know, the cost of paper, you know, as far as printing and handing out plan documents, that's probably 16 somewhere down there, but they could always pull off an upset. You never know. But yeah, number one seed, the cost of RX. And it's interesting because a lot of the third-party administrators, the employers, the broker advisors, stop-loss carriers that we work with in general, as far as cost containment is concerned, and specifically on individual services, frequently they'll reach out to us with questions about, hey, how do we contain the cost of these drugs? You mentioned specialty drugs. That's one of those things where it may not be so common, but when it hits, oh boy, does it hit, versus the quantity versus quality, where everybody's dealing with RX costs and they question whether there's anything they can do there as well. It's interesting because they'll reach out and they'll say, what can we do? Some of them use PBMs, some of them something alternative. They feel like it is what it is, status quo. There's very little they can do. And LG, from my perspective, I find we're engaged in a lot of conversations about hospital billing and PPOs and network replacements and cost containment from the medical side. But the moment someone says RX, there's this sense of helplessness, like there's nothing that they can do. And I know for a fact that you guys you not only have to explain what you do, but first you have to dissolve that misinformation, that idea that there's nothing they can do. And I'm hoping maybe we can start there.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, a great starting point may be just to look at it from the perspective of what is the difference between the role that RX Results takes on as the pharmacy risk manager versus the role of the traditional pharmacy benefit manager, the PBMs that are out there today. And quite simply, RX Results, and I think you know this as well, is we're actually a joint collaborative with the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. And we work closely with the College of Pharmacy. They actually have a department inside of the College of Pharmacy called the Evidence-Based Prescription Medicine Program that is constantly researching new drugs that are coming on in the market, looking at price points, looking at all the different things that the FDA is saying, look at all the clinical trials and clinical studies that are out there for new medications coming on the marketplace. And really, as the name implies, with the EBRX program, the evidence-based medicine component, that's really what we're doing. And what evidence-based medicine is looking at is definitely looking at providing access to medications that have been proven safe and effective, but at the same time, Ron, making sure that there are some price controls in there as well. So that's really the gist of what you're looking at. And again, what we do is we take on that clinical advocate role, and our client is the employer, and our client is the broker consultant. We don't have a relationship financially with PBMs. We don't have a relationship financially with big pharma. People like the fact that it's an independent, unbiased entity backed in an academic setting as well.
Hey, LG, this is Brady. I think so. I like the distinction you made there between what you do versus what a PBM does. And another area I think that's relevant here would be discussing the existing model and the conflict of interest. So maybe you could talk about what the current industry model provides and why that's sort of existing, why that's causing a conflict of interest as it stands.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic when you step back and look at it today. In the current environment, and if you look at the top specialty pharmacies that are in the marketplace today, and the top 4 specialty pharmacies probably represent anywhere from 68 to 75% of all the specialty pharmacy revenue in the marketplace today. And those specialty pharmacies are owned, and this is kind of consistent across the industry in general, most of the specialty pharmacies are owned by a PBM. And in the current model, the prescribing physicians know that they have to get a prior authorization for a specialty drug, and they are calling the PBM who owns the specialty pharmacy, who is going to disperse the specialty drug from their specialty pharmacy and most likely make some revenue from the drug manufacturer as well. And so in that model, everything that the PBM approves is a potential revenue source for them, and anything that they deny can cost them revenue. So it is clearly a conflict of interest. Now, conflict of interest doesn't mean that they've done anything wrong or unethical. I'm preaching to the attorneys on the phone here, I'm sure. But It's just a conflict of interest. It's just absolutely a conflict of interest. It's the same reason that we don't let hospitals do their own pre-certs for knee surgeries, back surgeries, and things of that nature. And I think this specialty pharmacy aspect has reached not only a high point in utilization, but some of the shock claims and some of the price tags of these specialty drugs has put this on the radar. And a lot of folks are stepping back and saying, hey, we need to remove this conflict of interest that exists in this market today.
So, LG, it's Ron. I actually had the pleasure of co-authoring an article with you a few years ago, and it's been too long since we wrote together, so maybe this is a sign that we should do the same again. And I recall in that article, one of the things that we touched upon was the fact that in the drug cost containment arena then, and I think it really hasn't changed much in the last few years, you hear a lot of, boo PBM, they're the bad guy, don't use them, use my PBM instead, we're different. And it's essentially everyone is sort of competing to show why their PBM is better than this other one. And the unique approach that you and RX Results took at the time and about which we wrote was that the number one issue is that people don't necessarily understand the role that a PBM is supposed to play. There are certain unrealistic expectations as far as what their job is from a cost containment standpoint as an advocate for the plan, rather than as a third party who's arranging sort of this exchange. And number one is because of that incorrect or improper perception of what a PBM is supposed to be doing, people are constantly looking for alternative PBM solutions. And what's interesting is your approach, like I said, is less to replace the PBM, but more act as the plan's advocate in dealing with the PBM. So it's not a matter of replacing them so much as it is appreciating what they do that's worth something. We talk in the article about the value, gasp, that PBMs bring to the table, how to maximize that value, and then put something in place to avoid some of the concerns. And I think a lot of it, almost a PBM is like a water heater in my basement where it obviously serves a purpose. I need hot water. And instead of replacing that heater every time you think something bad is going to happen, instead, you need a safety valve, something that's going to act as your advocate to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. But when there's the potential for an explosion, that safety valve is there to save you. And I think that that's kind of the position you guys have taken. And I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about that from you as far as how you actually coordinate with PBMs instead of acting as an adversary or replacing them. And then, if possible, maybe give us a couple stories about where you've come in and actually helped a TPA or a benefit plan and employer.
No, great point, Ron. And yeah, just to kind of add on to what you're saying there, in our model, we do not replace the PBM. The PBM stays in place and the specialty pharmacy stays in place. And in this environment of specialty drugs, and there are several PBMs across the country that have embraced this and are working closely with us to remove. They want to walk in to a room and say, look, we think it's a conflict of interest for us to be doing some of these prior authorizations. And again, the broker consultant or the TPA or the employer group has hired us directly and said, hey, we're going to remove this conflict of interest. So the relationship with the PBM and RX Results is critical. It's an important relationship. It's one that we need to work hand in hand with, but it gives, again, all of those impacted players, the plan sponsor, the TPA, the stop loss carrier, all the different folks that have an impact in this, it gives them the mindset and it gives them the comfort to know that there's an independent, unbiased entity at least doing the prior authorization on the specialty drugs. And it's being done again by a clinical entity that is independent, unbiased, and really the goal is to make sure that the right members get the right drugs at the right time to impact the best clinical outcome. You know, Ron, when you look at some of these specialty drugs and you guys see the commercials, there's some pretty nasty side effects. And so, you know, you want to make sure that this person is an appropriate candidate clinically for these specialty drugs before they get on there. You were talking about the impact that we're seeing And we have an example of a group that started with us. It's a large transportation company that started with us January 1st of 2017. So they've been with us about a year now. And in 2016, their specialty spend was running about $53 per member per month. At the end of 1 year, their specialty spend was running at about $28 per member per month. The national trend on specialty drug spend today is that you can expect that to increase year over year by about 22%. So had this group done nothing and just sat back and kind of continued to write checks that they were writing before, you would have expected that group to have been close to $65 per member per month. And so, the savings on the clinical appropriateness side get you upwards in this case. It was upwards of $675,000 a year, which is material money, especially when you're looking at a transportation company that's self-funded and growing.
I could think of a few things I could do with that money, rather than spend on RX. Maybe buy a more powerful snowblower. I think we're running onto a nor'easter. What is it, number 4 at this point, guys?
Something like that.
Yeah, I can't wait. Brady, you had a question?
Yeah, so LG, as you were describing sort of the tremendous impact that you can have in this industry, I couldn't help but think, how have PBMs reacted to what you're doing? Have you had any pushback from them, or what's really been the message that you've been receiving from them?
Well, again, there's quite a few across the country that have really embraced this. And in fact, they embrace it. People change either inspiration or desperation, right? And a lot of time, I think the inspiration has been a broker consultant who's kind of stepped up, and or a TPA client or TPA that has stepped up and said, hey, look, we're going to do this differently. We're going to take a different approach. And if you want to work with us, this is how we're going to go forward. And simply they're saying is we're carving out the prior authorization. Again, it goes back, the PBM stays in place. You're still the specialty pharmacy. We're simply outsourcing the prior authorization of the specialty drugs. And there are several PBMs across the country that are cooperative and realize that they're putting themselves in a very good position to grow their company. And then, as you can imagine, there are some PBMs that would not like to see us show up. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag on that.
Our format, whether it's podcast or webinar or even blog posts, tends to be somewhat general, LG, because we're trying to identify issues in general, maybe bring some awareness to the audience of potential solutions in general. But I know from my own experience, and I think everybody on the line and in the room agrees with me, when people hear about these issues in general and solutions in general, they come to us with specific questions, specific examples, and wonder if there's something that they can do specifically to address that specific problem. And obviously that's not something we can do here, again, in this format, but I imagine you would welcome the opportunity for people to come to you with specific questions and needs regarding specialty RX in general, and see if there's an opportunity there. So I guess at this point, I just want to make sure I give you an opportunity to let people know how they could reach you to ask you those questions and see if there's something that can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way we approach this is very conversational, and most of our conversations actually start with data. We don't walk into a room assuming that we can help everyone and that we come in and we've got a magic stick and we can come in and hit this and fix it and make it all better. We start conversations with data, and they actually start with what we call a pharmacy risk analysis, which gives us all an opportunity to sit down and say, where are some key trends? What are some areas that we can highlight? What can we shine a light on? Where are some potential areas that you would have impact, and how much impact is there, and how much risk and exposure do you have in your current design? So everything starts with that conversation. And they can reach me a couple of different ways. You can reach me at lghanzel@rxresults.com. You can call me direct as well at area code 817-296-8147, or they can contact you because you are worldwide, Ron, and everybody knows you and the FIA group, and definitely can work through you guys to get to me as well.
Perfect. And you mentioned the university down in Arkansas, and I suddenly had this epiphany. You know, I always thought your accent was New York, New York City, maybe Brooklyn, but I suddenly had this realization that that's not the case. But either way, it's great hearing from you, great talking to you, and hopefully we can bring some awareness to the listeners and help them empower their plans, specifically as it relates to this number one seed risk to health benefits in general, and something that I'm sure is not going away. So thank you so much for joining us, LG. Look forward to future endeavors with you in collaboration. Thank you so much for dialing in, and for everyone else listening to the podcast today, we appreciate it. As always, feel free to visit us online at fiagroup.com. You can reach me at rpeck@fiagroup.com. Rule of thumb, first initial, last name at anything will usually get you that person. I've learned that over time. But again, thank you, everyone. Appreciate the time, LG. And thank you, everyone else out there, for empowering your plans with us.